this is a country, the UK, which is strangely obsessed with the Second World War. One of the reasons we are Brexiting is because of this misplaced nostalgia that those were the great times. There's no doubt that the reason that the country voted to leave the European Union is a narrative in the press for decades, plus a deep feeling in the English that they shouldn't be part of the EU. You know, one fed the other. It's not as if the press created Brexit totally.
Yeah.
But when you consider 52-48, I think the natural, without the British media, I think we'd be much more 30-70 or 60-40 to remain. And there's one other critical thing which I feel very deeply, which is this is a country, the UK, which is strangely obsessed with the Second World War. And it's very controversial to say that, but it's absolutely true. Everybody knows it. The political class know it. People in the media talk about it the whole time. And it's understandable for many reasons. You know, this country fought alone for some time, and then with the Russians and the Americans, and did what we did in 39-45. But I think that the country, one of the reasons we are Brexiting is because of this misplaced nostalgia that those were the great times, whereas now is not the great times. Whereas if you look at a country, particularly like Germany, you know, Germany, you know, I took my eldest son to Dachau, one of the camps last year. He's 20, to one of the camps last year, and we noticed that the place was full of German school children, and that's because German school children have by law to go to at least one concentration camp. And Germany is a country as a whole that's in sort of what you might call healthy recovery about what happened in 39-45, and we are a country in the UK that has never recovered from that trauma. We have never recovered from the Second World War, and we are still living that war. And we still, you just look at the UK press, the language that is used about your country and Europe. They are, you know, the enemies. We're at war. We have a war cabinet. We've got battles. You know, all the language. You know, Churchill. You know, Churchill died a long time ago, and yet we have a young prime minister, or relatively young, who's wrapped himself up in this language, in the flag, and with, you know, Spitfires, Dad's Army, all the speechwriters just dropped this stuff in. You know, and I was born in '63, so that's nearly 20 years after the war. And most people that were, you know, that vote were born after that. So why is it that we have this obsession with, you know, quote unquote, our finest hour, when we have built within the European Union an incredibly successful and diverse country and economy?
Invented the single market.
Absolutely. You know, we don't have enemies in the EU or in Ireland. We do have enemies, but they're not in the European Union.
So why do you think there is that obsession then?
I think it's deeply psychological. I think, if you want to know what I really think, I think my parents' generation, so people in their 70s and 80s who were 70-80% Brexit outside London, have voted to leave the European Union after sort of misplaced affection for their parents who fought the war. I think they think it's almost out of respect for their war generation, we will vote to leave the European Union, even though towards when I was editing, I once had lunch with Ted Heath because we'd written something terrible about him, and he threatened to sue us. We'd made a mistake, and he called up, or his people called up and said, "I'm not going to sue you, but I'd like to have lunch." So I had lunch with him at the Savoy Grill. I turned up, and he said he saw me as a representative of the anti-European press, which I suppose that I was at the time. Although I tried to explain that, you know, I was opposed to the EU, the single currency, but not the EU. And he interrupted me and he said, "Have you ever sat in a tank?" And I said, "No, I haven't ever sat in a tank." He said, "Have you ever sat in a tank with somebody firing at you?" I said, "Well, no, I never sat in a tank." And he said, "Well, I did. I sat in the tank and the Germans were firing at me." He said, "When I was sat in that tank, all I could think about was if I got out of here, we were going to do something to bring Europe together." And I never forgot that, because it was the intelligent, the obvious consequence of the Second World War that we created the EU and peace and prosperity. And it's very tragic that the country that within Europe, putting aside the US and the Russians, predominantly won the Second World War is the country that has gone to war with the very institution that our forefathers created. And I think that's very sad.